The city's pulse beat a frantic rhythm beneath my feet as the elevator ascended, a steel and glass arrow piercing the pre-dawn gloom. Rain lashed against the exterior, streaking the panoramic windows of the skyscraper, distorting the urban sprawl into an impressionistic blur. My internal clock, usually a precise instrument, felt a beat off. 3 hours of sleep, a cold shower, and now this. Another high-stakes puzzle, delivered with the urgency of a ticking bomb. He was found by his assistant this morning. The lead detective, a burly figure named Thorne, stated, his voice a low rumble beside me. Looks like a heart attack, maybe a stroke. I offered a non-committal grunt. Thorne knew better than to expect an immediate verdict from me. My job wasn't to confirm assumptions. It was to dismantle them, piece by painstaking piece, until the truth, however ugly, lay exposed. The elevator doors whispered open, revealing a short corridor bathed in the sterile glow of recessed lighting. Uniformed officers stood guard, their faces tight with the gravity of the scene. The air, despite the building's advanced filtration, carried a faint metallic tang, the scent of disruption, of something profoundly out of place. We stepped into what I immediately recognized as the nerve center of a formidable enterprise. This wasn't just an office, it was a fortress, a meticulously curated space designed to project power and absolute control. The victim, the detective Thorne, not related to the detective, had been a titan in the tech world, a man whose innovations had reshaped digital landscapes. Now he was just another body, waiting for his scrutiny. The room was vast, dominated by a floor-to-ceiling window that offered a dizzying view of the city waking up. But his eyes were drawn past the high-tech facade to the true heart of the CEO's operations, an area protagonist recognized as an offshore law office with shred bins and locked safes. The presence of such a dedicated space, designed for extreme discretion, always raised his antennae. It spoke of secrets, of information deemed too sensitive for even standard corporate protocols. The detective Thorne lay sprawled in a plush ergonomic chair, his head lolled to one side, facing the rain-streaked window. He wore an expensive bespoke suit, the silk tie still perfectly knotted. A half-empty coffee mug sat on a coaster beside a tablet displaying a complex financial spreadsheet. Everything about the scene screamed business as usual, interrupted by an unforeseen biological failure. Initial paramedics called it in as a probable cardiac event. Another colleague, a junior investigator, explained, stepping aside to give him full access. No signs of struggle, no obvious trauma. Protagonist donned his gloves, the thin latex a second skin, and approached the deceased. Protagonist circled the chair, his gaze sweeping over every inch of the man and his immediate surroundings. His complexion was ashen, lips slightly parted. His eyes, though unfocused, still held a hint of the sharp intellect he was known for. His initial assessment aligned with the others. No visible wounds, no defensive marks. His hands rested loosely in his lap, the fingers uncurled. A small, almost imperceptible tremor of unease started in his gut. It wasn't anything concrete, just a faint discord in the visual symphony of the scene. Most natural deaths, especially sudden ones, leave some trace of struggle, however brief. A clutched hand, a displaced object, a more contorted posture. Thorne's stillness felt too arranged. I leaned closer, my breath held, observing the fine details. The subtle sheen of sweat on his brow, the faint tremor in his lower lip. These were consistent with a cardiac event. But then I saw it, just beneath the knot of his silk tie, where the collar of his crisp white shirt met his skin. A faint, almost imperceptible discoloration. It wasn't a bruise in the conventional sense, not purple or blue. It was more like a slight abrasion, a shallow indentation, no larger than a thumbnail. The color was a pale, almost translucent red, easily missed, easily dismissed as a friction mark from the collar, or perhaps a minor skin irritation. but his eyes had been trained for decades to see what others overlooked. The shape the mark wasn't random. It was too precise, too geometric, almost like a faint, shallow impression from something small, hard, and distinctly unnatural. It wasn't a wrinkle in the skin, nor a natural blemish. It had an edge, a deliberate quality that screamed, applied pressure. Protagonist took a small, specialized lens from his kit and brought it closer. The faint lines within the red mark resolved into an almost perfect, minuscule hexagon. Not a natural pattern, not a random abrasion. His internal monologue, usually a calm cascade of observations, intensified. This wasn't a heart attack. The high-stakes environment, the advanced technology, the shielded offshore law office with shred bins and locked safes. It all clicked into a new, far more sinister arrangement. My work had just begun. My gaze sweeping over every inch, the high-profile CEO, I felt the familiar pull of an anomaly. The initial assessment screamed natural causes. No forced entry, no struggle, no obvious trauma. Yet the way the deceased slumped, a peculiar rigidity in the hands that wasn't quite rigor mortis, settled an uneasy weight in my gut. A meticulous mind like mine thrived on these subtle dissonances. I spent another hour in that hushed office, documenting every detail, every shadow, every errant fiber. The lead detective, a pragmatic man with an air of weary patience, watched me from the doorway. And that detective is often the first sign of a mess. The detective merely grunted, a sound that conveyed both skepticism and a reluctant trust in my instincts. He knew my track record. The high-rise building's security footage had shown no unauthorized access, no suspicious individuals. The CEO had been alone for hours. The official narrative was already writing itself. Stress, heart attack, a tragic end for a brilliant mind. But my internal compass pointed elsewhere. It was a place I preferred for cases requiring absolute discretion, where the echoes of machinery long silenced provided a peculiar kind of solitude. The vast concrete floor, once stained with oil and grime, had been meticulously cleaned and sectioned off. My team had set up a temporary but fully equipped examination station in the center, bathed in thick glow of portable LED lights. The air in theory was cool, carrying the faint metallic scent of disuse and the sharper tang of antiseptic. My instruments, laid out in an orderly progression on a stainless steel tray, gleamed under the focused light. The deceased, now resting on the examination table, seemed smaller, less imposing without the trappings of his opulent office. I began the external examination, my eyes tracing every contour, every blemish. The deceased's skin was pale, almost translucent, but otherwise unremarkable. No defensive wounds, no signs of blunt force trauma. I meticulously checked the hands, the forearms, the neck, all the usual places a struggle might leave its mark. It reinforced the initial assessment, the idea of a quiet, unexpected passing. But I knew better than to trust the obvious. I gently parted the hair at the base of the skull behind the left ear. The skin there was unblemished, smooth. I moved to the right, and then I saw it. A tiny circular mark, no larger than a pinprick, nestled just beneath the hairline, a millimeter or two behind the earlobe. It was so small, so perfectly round, it could have been a mole, a freckle, or even an insect bite. But the skin around it was ever so slightly discolored, a faint, almost silvery sheen that caught the light in an unnatural way. I leaned in closer, activating the macro lens on my handheld microscope. The mark resolved into a precise, almost surgical puncture. The edges were clean, not jagged, suggesting a very fine, sharp instrument. And within the minute indentation, a faint, almost invisible residue shimmered. It looked like a dried crystalline substance. A high-profile CEO found dead in a secure office, no signs of struggle, and this tiny, hidden mark. It spoke of precision, of stealth. It spoke of a method designed to leave virtually no trace, to mimic an innocuous event. "You found something." His voice was flat, but I detected a new edge of anticipation. "I found the entry point," my voice steady despite the surge of adrenaline. I gestured for him to approach, pointing to the almost invisible mark. Someone wanted this to look like a quiet departure. Almost perfect. My findings, the pinprick, the faint residue. The detective's brow furrowed, his earlier skepticism replaced by a grim realization. A dart? A specialized needle? Possibly, I confirmed. Something designed to deliver a fast-acting agent, leaving minimal external evidence. Whatever it was dwazed with surgical precision, aimed at a vulnerable point, easily overlooked. The implications were profound. My initial sense, the subtle inconsistencies had been validated. The hunt for a killer had just begun. A man of his stature, with his kind of wealth and influence, would have had enemies, rivals. He operated in a world where information was currency and secrets were power. A world where fortunes were made and lost overnight, where corporate espionage was rampant. My mind drifted to the kind of places where such secrets might be kept, where corporate betrayals were hidden, where digital trails were erased. I thought of shell corporations, of hidden accounts, the kind of place that specialized in discretion. "We need to dig into his financial records," I told the detective, pulling back from the table. Every transaction, every partnership, every recent acquisition, especially anything tied to an offshore law office with shred bins and locked safes. This wasn't personal rage. This was calculated. The detective nodded slowly, his gaze fixed on the deceased. "That changes the entire scope of this investigation, Blake. This becomes a whole different beast." Indeed, already planning the next steps, the intricate chemical analyses, the microscopic examination of that minute residue. The game had changed, and I was ready to play. Each step on the polished marble floor echoed with a hollow finality, a stark contrast to the buzzing silence, the CEO's office. I had left the initial scene with more questions than answers, a microscopic residue the only tangible thread in a tapestry of corporate cleanup. Now, with the preliminary analyses underway, I was back, driven by an insistent itch, a forensic intuition that demanded a second, deeper look. The building itself was a monument to modern finance. Glass, steel, and an oppressive sense of impenetrable security. Keycard access gates stood open, temporarily bypassed by the crime scene tape that now crisscrossed the entrance to the executive suite. My eyes, however, weren't on the temperature. They were on the minute details, the ones overlooked when the focus had been solely on the deceased. Back again? The voice, gruff and laced with a weariness I knew all too well, belonged to the detective assigned the case. He leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed, his gaze a skeptical challenge. Sometimes, the story is written on the walls, in the dust, or in the towel ether. Theished off the frame, stepping into the room. "Still chasing ghosts, are we? My team's preliminary report points to a cardiac event. Clean bill of health from the company doctor, but these high flyers, they push themselves." The desktop was a minimalist's dream. A sleek monitor, a leather-bound notepad, and a single unlit Cuban cigar in an ornate ashtray. And it certainly doesn't explain the subtle inconsistencies I observed. The detective scoffed, a low rumble in his chest. His tie was slightly askew. "Is that what we're calling a clue now?" I ignored the sarcasm. My fingers, gloved, traced the edge of the desk, then the keyboard. The power indicator on the monitor glowed a soft amber signif the leap mode. When was the last time the system was active? IT Forensics is still pulling logs, but the initial sweep showed nothing unusual. No forced entry, no unauthorized access. His personal assistant said he was the last one in the office yesterday, Theg. My gaze drifted to the power strip beneath the desk. The Ethernet cable. I pulled out the portable UV light from my kit. The beam swept across the desk's surface, revealing faint smudges, fingerprints, and a scattering of almost invisible dust motes. Dust, in a meticulously cleaned executive office, could tell a story of recent activity or, more importantly, inactivity. I moved to the large panoramic window overlook the city, my eyes tracing the seals, the faint condensation lines. Then to the air vents, checking for any sign, tempering, or residue. The detective watched me, his expresso detective of exasperation and grudging curiosity. "You know, Sterling, we've got other cases," he stated, his patience clearly wearing thin. "This one's pretty open and shut." "Open and shut cases rarely require a second visit from me," I murmured, my attention drawn to a small, almost imperceptible discoloration on the base of a decorative planter near the corner. Theophist, he was a faint, almost-wasn't-sparent film, a sheen that caught the light differently than the polished ceramic. I knelt, examining it closely. It wasn't a cleaning product. It had a faint, almost metallic odor, but not the saffant residue from the previous day. This was fainter, more diffused. My eyes followed an imaginary line from the planter towards a built-in bookshelf, then to a recessed cabinet that looked more like part-the wall paneling. I ran my gloved hand along the seam. There was a barely visible gap, a hairline fracture in the wood grain that indicated thin compartment. The detective, seeing my focus, moved closer, his skep a detectively forgotten. "What is it?" he asked, his voice lower now. I pressed gently on the panel. Inside, nestled among a few innocuous-looking binders and a small, Theric-locked data drive, was a single, crumpled piece of paper. It wasn't a document, but a hastily torn-off corner of what looked like a legal letterhead. My fingers carefully retrieved it. The paper, thin and crisp, bore a partial emblem, a stylized anchor, and beneath it, a fragment of text. I pieced together the letters in my mind. F. Shore Law Office with shred bins and locked safes. The air in the room seemed to thicken. The ather thereof corporate secrecy, the digital obfuscation. It all pointed to this. This wasn't a natural death. This was a carefully orchestrated disappearance, designed to lake an accident, and the trail led directly to a place built for concealing truth. The game had indeed changed, and the rules were far more complex than I had initially imagined. My chemical analyses, my microscopic examinations, they were no longer just about a body. They were about unraveling a conspiracy. "It means," I replied, my gaze fixed on the cryptic fragment, a cold certainty settling in my gut. Our CEO had secrets he didn't the found, and someone knew where to look for them, or what to look for, before we even arrived. The meticulous layers of corporate secrecy, the digital obfuscation, it was all a carefully wasucted facade, and that tiny sliver of paper was the first crack I'd found. The lead investigator, a man whose patience was clearly wearing thin with the corporate bureaucracy, nodded slowly. "So, we're looking for more than just a cause of death. We're looking for a motive, and whoever went to all this trouble to hide it." He gestured to the sprawling, silent office. "Where do we start, Sterling? This man's Liftine algorithm of control." "We start by dismantling that algorithm," I asserted, stepping away from the desk. "I need full access to his digital records, emails, server logs, communication devices, and I need to know about his physical world, too. Who were his closest associates, his rivals? Any ongoing legal battles? Any major financial shifts?" A digital forensics specialist, a young woman with intense focus in her eyes, chimed in. "His primary server is a fortress, Blake, encrypted beyond anything I've seen in a corporate setting. It's going to take time, maybe days, to even get past the first layer." "Time we don't have," I countered, my mind already racing through possibilities. "While you're working on that, I want to look at his personal calendar, his travel logs, and I want a list of every legal firm his company has retained in the last 5 years, especially dealing with international assets or intellectual property." The fragment of paper, barely larger than my thumbnail, had a faint watermark, a series of interwoven initials that sug faint specific legal entity, not just a generic corporate lawyer. The lead investigator relayed my requests, his voice echoing in the cavernous office. Within the Thea paralegal from Vance's legal department, a nervous individual in a sharp suit reluctantly provided a list. My eyes scanned it, searching for anything that resonated with the faint watermark. And there it was, Sterling and Vance Holdings, offshore legal and asset management. The Sterling wasn't mine, of course, but the name caught my attention. It was a firm known for its discretion, its impenetrable client attorney page. "This one," I said, tapping the entry. "I need to visit their offices, today." The paralegal's face paled. "Sir, that's highly irregular, and their main office is not easily accessible." "Irregular or not," I stated, my voice firm, "a man is dead, and his secrets are now evidence. Arrange it." Hours later, the lead investigator and I found ourselves navigating the sterile, polished corridors of an offshore law office with shred bins and locked safes. It was located in a Maud wasn't-assuming building, tucked away in a bustler either. Their Ursations only there controlled quiet. There was minimalist their head stone, devoid theirs. This place wasn't designed to welcome. It was designed to protois were met by the firm's principal counsel, a sharp-featured woman with an unwavering gaze. She offered no condolences, only a polite, almost practiced resistance. However, our obligations to our clients are absolute. We cannot, under any circumstances, disclose information pertaining to Mr. Vance's affairs without a court order, the highest authority. Her voice was smooth, devoid of inflection, a well-rehearsed defense. "We're here to understand the scope of his involvement, any recent changes, any ongoing disputes." She remained impassive. Vance's dealings through our firm were handled with the utmost discretion. There were no disputes that would lead to this. She gestured vaguely, avoiding the word murder. My gaze lingered on a cluster of locked safes built into one wall, their steel doors gleaming under the recessed lighting. But it wasn't the safes themselves that caught my attention. It was the shred bins. Owa's particular, closest to the counsel's desk, seemed almost overflowing. A small mountain of finely cross-cut paper visible through the translucent plastic. It looked newer, more recently filled than the others. "Tell me about the shredding protocols here," I asked, my voice casual but my mind suddenly alert. "Is it standard practice to shred documents related to a client immediately after their passing?" The counsel paused, a flicker of something, annoyance, crossing her face before her composure returned. "We maintain strict data destruction policies. Mr. All redundant or sensitive materials are disposed of appropriately and regularly." "And how regularly is regularly?" I pressed, stepping closer to the bin. The paper fragments were impossibly small, but I could make out faint streaks of color on perhaps a logo or a specific type of chart. "On an as-needed basis," she replied, her tone tightening. "This is hardly relevant to your investigation." "On the contrary," I countered, my eyes narrowing. "It's extremely relevant. A man who was meticulous about digital obfuscation would certainly apply the same rigor to his physical paper trail. And the volume in this particular bin suggests a recent aggressive purge. What exactly was so urgent that it couldn't wait?" My questions hung in the air, unanswered. But I saw the subtle stiffness in the counsel's posture, the way her hand instinct went to her desk, her fingers tapping a rhythm I couldn't quite decipher. She wasn't giving me answers, but her reactions were speaking volumes. Vance had indeed been in the process of erasing something, and the urgence that had spilled over into the physical world, right here in this impenetrable office. And that meant whatever was destroyed, whatever was hidden, was directly connected to his final moments. This was a deliberate act of concealment, an attempt to sever a vital connection. And someone in Asteril's silent office knew more than they were letting on. The image the counsel's hand, tapping that nervous rhythm on her desk, replayed in my mind as I drove away from the offshore law office with shred-thin locked safes. Vance had been there, no doubt. My questions about the CEO's last known movements, his digthet print, and the nature of therid their nerve. Etheriut corporates there it was. Ab there herein my secure research. Theral air felt like a cleansing bather atmosphere of that office. The hump theremints was a familiar, comfo there was my domain, a place of object their fromal posturing and corporate maneuvering. I had a stack of evidence containers waiting for me, each holding a piece the puzzle I'd meticulously collected from the high-rise office and the CEO's body. The initial assessment had been a sham, a convenient narrative for a skeptical police force. My job was to dismantle it, the excruciating piece. I begather the microfibers I'd been into the plush carpet near the CEO's executive chair. They were an unotherland, not standard office issue. Under the polarized light microscope, their crystalline structure shimmered, hinting at a synthetic origin I couldn't immediately place. I logged their specific characteristics, then moved on to the residue scraped from the polished surface, the CEO's desk. It was almost invisible to the naked eye. I was waxy film, but under the scathe electron microscope, it resolved into a complex matrix of the and faints compounds that bled into one another. My focus narrowed, excluding everything but the microscopic world unfolding before me. I systematically processed each sample. The faint smear from the CEO's wrist, the almost imperceptible particles from the ventilation grate, the minute fragments from the edge-the shattered coffee mug. Each offered tantalizing yet fragmented data that the contusion on the CEO's temple, initially dissemed the fall-related injury, remained my primacy. It was shallow, almost superficial, yet the unwasing tissue showed an unusual pattern of cellular diceos. I'd taken several tissue samples, though no larger than a grain of rice, now prepared on slides. I moved to the confocal microscope, its laser scanning through the layers, building a three-dimensional image the cellular damage. It wasn't the blunt force trauma thepect from a simple fall. Concentrated, almost surgical in its precision. Deep within one the tissue samples, nestled amidst the fractured capillaries and compressed cellulowacentres, was a foreign particle. It was minute, barely a micron in length, a sliver always thing, crystalline and impossibly thin. I adjusted the A, zooming in further. It wasn't a dust particle, not a fragment of glass, nor any natural fiber I recognized. Its edges were too sharp, its composition too uniform. It had a faint iridescent sheen, catching the laser light in an unnatural wasn't-tacted the particle with a micro-manipulator, a taffantring steady hands and absolute concentration. Transferring it to the mass spectrometer, I initiated the analysis. The machine hummed, cycled the theroticols, and then the data began to stream across the monitor. The spectral scythe was unlike anything in my extensive database of environmental contaminants, industrial materials, or biological agents. It was a synthetic polymer, highly advanced, with a molecular fingerprint. It contained elements rarely combined in conventional manufacture designed for extreme durability and minimal visibility. This wasn't just a random particle. This was a component, a fragment of something designed there and. The precise, localized cellular disruption, the shallow contusion, and now Thesa, impossibly small yet impossibly strong synthetic shard. My mind raced, connecting the dots. It wasn't a conventional weapon. It was something that delivered a focused, non-blunt impact, leaving minimal external evidence. A high-frequency sonic emitter with a contact point? The possibilities were unsettling, pointing towards wasn't-TF Sophaon I rarely encountered. The implications hit me with the force of a physical blow. It wasn't Themon murder. This was a professional operation, meticulously planned, employing technology designed, therio trace. The killer hadn't just tried to obfuscate the Daiga evidence. They had tried to erase the very method of det wasn't G on its subtlety to be overlooked. The council's nervousness, Vance's unseen presence. It all made a terrible, chilling sense now. They weren't just protecting corporate secrets. They were protecting the knowledge of a targeted, technologically advanced execution. My head in pound, but a cold, clear determination settled in my chest. I had found the needle in the haystack, and it was sharper than I could have imagined. This discovery wawasake the foundation Thetial investigation, and I knew the detective would be skeptical. But the evidence was undeniable, irrefutable. I had just peeled back the first layer of a very damnous onion, and the next steps would be Frogaith even greater T-detective to make the call. Her hand, tapping that nervous rhythm on her desk, replayed in my mind as I drove away from the offshore law office with shred bins and locked safes. The question now was why and how it connected to the CEO's death. The city lights beat into streaks of color as I navigated the familiar routes back to my facility. The air inside the car felt heavy, charged with the postthemi-opened safesment the scene. The seemingly natural death seost like a Vaether-eped. Every inconsidered, every slieviatio the reed, began to coalesce into, theirled into the under their bay of my specially their facility. The silent their contrast to the hum the city. Inside, my wutherery of order, each instrument in its place, Scritherian stream of thy stripped off iacket, rolling up my soldereed the main console. AEO's Cathes, already there a fresh pair of eyes now sharpened by sus there the digital footprint, the realm where Vance would apathy the most ease. The CEO's encrypted company laptop, his Thel tablet, and his high-end smartphone sat on a sterile CEO's loaded the deep scan protocols, focusing on system-level logs, kernel activity, and network traffic from the hours leading up to the CEO's demise. The process was slow, methodical, a digital CEOSyn. While the machines whirred, I turned to the physical evidence from the high-rise office. The CEO's desk, usually pristine, had yielded a single, almost microscopic fiber. Initially, I'd dismissed it as an environmental contaminants OZ thread from a cleaning cloth. The cider's suit. I retrieved the sealed evidence bag containing the fiber. Under the electron microscope, its unique CEO's composition gleamed. It wasn't cotothy or any common office fabric. It was a polymer, specifically designed for durability and low friction, often used in specially industrial applications, or, more relevantly, in certain types of high-performance technical apparel. Angers typed rapidly, cross-referencing the fiber's spectral analysis against known databases. The results was interest, pointing to a niche market. But then, a match. A line of high-tech gloves, popular among hardware engineers for their anti-static properties and tactile variety. The sort of gloves someone like Vance, an expert in intricate circuit boards and sensitive equipment, might own. A knot tightened in my stomach. This was a physical anomaly in a death that was supposed to be purely biological. The digital scan completed its first pass. I scrolled through lines of code, network addresses, and time-stamped events. A of it was routine, but one entry snagged my attention like a burr. A brief, almost imperceptible Dwasürst, originating from an external IP Autohad, pinged the CEO's smart thermostat INA office just moments before his report to my laps. It wasn't a hack. Not in the traditional SEWAS was a command, a single, precise instruction. The smart thermostat system was designed for remote WAS, but this particular THED bypassed the usual user interface. It was a direct injection ISO-Savice programming, overriding the safety parameters. The WASD had forced the unit to output an extreme, focused burst of cold air, wasn't at the CEO's imiasinitia enough to cause hypothermia, but enough to induce a sudden, sharp physiological shock to someone with a pre-existing, though undiagnosed, their vulnerability. It was a targeted, almost surgical strike. The external IP address traced back to a series of proxy WAS, a digital ghost dance, but won the hops. Setharik theretered an obscure, custom-built VPN. A VPN aognized from a previous unrelated case involving data theft from a rival tech firm. It was a signature, a unique digital fingerprint belonging to Vance. The same Vance whose name had Madwas Council's hand tapped nervously. The pieces clicked into place with an alarming finality. The fiber from the gloves, sugang a Hans Therens, perhaps to install or tamper with something subtly. The remote command to the thermostat, a perfectly disguised trigger for a heart attack in a high-stress environment. And the carefully orchestrated digital obfuscation, hiding Vance's tracks behind layers of proxies and custom software. He hadn't they're involved. He was the architect. It wasn't just corporate espionage theas a cold, calculated murder. Exatheth, a horrifying blend of technological prowess and physiol, was insight. The CEO's death wasn't an accident. It was a meticulously planned assassination. The tension in the room, privé a low hum, now throb was a palpable energy. I leaned back from the console, rubbing my temple the tech guru, the corporate asset, the man who thadly been outwasanty. His motive remained somewhat veiled, but his method was now tertius clear. I reached my secure communication device. The chief investigator needed to know. The threat just a forensic puzzle anymore. It was a manhunt. And Vance, wherever he was, wouldn't be expecting this. He had covered his trail. Waste well and theory confrontation was coming, and theated to be ready. The question now was how to prove it, especially when Thyshal channels seemed content to accept the most convenient narrative. My gut churned with the unease of an incomplete puzzle, a feeling I'd learned to sever years of staring down death's intricate lies. The detective, a man whose patience wore thin with every unanswered question, sat across from me in his cramped office, the air thick with stale coffee and the scent of father paperwork. He pushed a folder across the scarred metal desk. Here's what we have on Vance. The man was on a secure video conference call with a Detective International IARS during the estimated time of death. Recorded, time-stamped, cross-referenced by 6 different parties in 3 time zones. He was physically present in his penthouse apartment, confirmed by his security detail, his personal assistant, and the building's biometric entry logs. I picked up the folder. The pages rustled, filled with digital timestamps, server logs, and witness statements. The piece of evidence, individually, was a brick in an unassailable. The video conference logs were particularly damning to my theory. Vance was visible, engaged, his movements clear, his voice distinct. The conversation covered high-sex financial projections, a subject that demanded his full, undivided attention. And the security detail? What about the apartment's internal cameras? Though I already suspected the answer. His apartment's intertheorists were offline for a scheduled system upgrade, a routine maintenance protocol his tech team initiates quarterly. The security detail confirms he didn't leave the apartment from the moment he entered until well after the CEO was found. His assistant was in the adjacent room, preparing documents, saw him enter and exit the conference call at the precise times logged. The detective leaned back, a hint of resignation in his voice. We've checked the digital footprint of his devices. All activity consistent with his alibi. It's a dead end, Blake. Looks like you're chasing ghosts. I didn't reply immediately, my eyes scanning the meticulous records. The alibi was indeed robust, almost aggressive detective of corroborating detail. The overlapping layers of digital and human verification felt less like an organic truth and more like a carefully constructed shield. These were the hyzers of a different story. What about the exeant of death, pushing the folder away? His lady evaluation, the cellular degradation, combined with the subtle shifts in core body temperature readings suggests that could be narrower than the initial estimate. Or perhaps slightly earlier. The detective frowned. We are talking minutes, Blake. Vance's conference call spanned hours, encompassing any reasonable margin of error for time of death. Minutes matter, I countered, my voice low but firm. Especially when we're dealing with a tech CEO and a world of remote access. What if the method wasn't a direct physical confrontation? What tech-diving was orchestrated, not executed during that conference call? The idea took root, blossoming into a chilling possibility. The digital obfuscation I'd sensed from the beginning suddenly gained a new, sinister dimension. I returned to my own workspace, a chaotic tableau of forensic reports, digital scans, and magnified photographs from the scene. The detective's words echoed, but his determination only hardened. A's snagged on a nearly invisible scuff mark on the polished floor, directly be a power strip. It was minuscule, easily overlooked, but its angle and depth suggested a heavy metallic object had been dragged, or perhaps Drawas there. Protagonist cross-referenced its composition with the metallic dust protagonist theted from the scuff mark. Spectral analysis came back. A unique alloy, often used in digitally server components, specifically those designed for remote data and processing. Components not typically found in a CEO's high-rise office, but certainly in a secure off-site data center. Benibi was a meticulously crafted decoy. Vance hadn't needed to be physically present to deliver the low. He had merely needed to trigger it. The scuff, the residue, the timing of death, and the offshore law office with shred bins and locked safes. They all pointed to a Dia Morthex conspiracy, a network of hidden connections and digital manipulations. This wasn't just a murder, it was a ghost in the machine. A Vance was its conductor. The scope of operation, the resources involved, suggested I was hunting a lone killer, but a well-oiled, deeply entrenched organization. The tension in Thium was palpable. A silent alarm ringing in my ears, an idea that the killing was or coffee with Gudashredbin Surens Kayandaklock safes into a chilling possibility. If that the rue, the physical crime scene, meticulously as I'd examined it, was only a facade. The real battle lay in the digital realm. I spent the next hour in a sterile windowless room at the pizzeria tangle of cables and Mulai Monthrihi table. The digital forensi the reg woman with the focused eyes and quick therement, theoretically sifted through the regital footprint. Her fingers, the RIA keyboard, calling up lines other logs, and incur their role was to guide her, to point my toward the anomalies I suspected human motivations behind the cold data. Focus on the period ether he confera call, I instructed, leaning closer to one of her screens. Thereon the call itself. Look for any unusual outgoing connectors or access attempts to secure servers. Digital a lock of hair thereof. I've already flagged a few anomalies. The CEO's personal device, which was found in his office, shows a brief digital ripted outbound connection just minutes before the call began. It's an unusual protocol for his typical usage. My gaze sharpened. Unusual how? It's designed to leave almost no trace, her voice quiet but firm. A ghost in the machine. But it did leave something. A faint echo, like a ripple in water. I'm trying to trace the destination IP. The air in Theom grew heavy with Antisipsios Ha servers, and the soft clicks-thee keep-thee are the only sounds. I watched her work, my mind racing, piecing together fragments. If the Katoid faint then this Kontath is made, what was he sending? Hours blurred into air, intense stretch. Coffee cups piled up, and the outside world ceased to exist. The digital forensics expert navigated a labyrinth of firewalls and proxies, her determination mirroring my own. We were hunting a phantom, a digital puppet master. Finally, she let out a soft exclamation. Got it. The connection resolved to a series of jump points, all designed to obscure the true origin. But the final destination, it's a server registered to an offshore law office with shred bins and locked safes. It's a known shell company haven. My breathing irregular. Can you access it, the least see what kind of data was exchanged? She shook her head. Not directly, but protagonist can see the type of data. It will mine casual email or a video conference. It Westo data dump, a compressed file roughly equivalent to an entire company's financial recthient from the CEO's device. She Claire was her eyes still glued to the screen. But here's where it get digital, Blake. The timestamp on the data Tranlon Farron offices with extractions read a full bins and Dow. The CEO Ander for Clockadad Safesa, or worse, already incapacitated while the upload occurred. Makwas appear as if he was still active. Can you trace NES to his device during that window? Protagonist pressed. It accessed his device, initiated the data transfer WCEO self from the Loisant, left a faint dither unique idea. My heart hammered against my ribs, their thud. And that signature. Where does it? There'd, her fingers hovering over the keyboard. Her gaze their eyes saw the of shock, then disbelief. In Heather, she began, her voice, Theranta. The Therant external. It's embedded within the Catherernal network, and it's Thether Heath financial officer. The air let the lungs in a rush. The same individual who hathers miss my concerns, so eager to close the case as an accident. They're me individual, they're the CEO's sudden demise, not just in terms of corporate power, but potentially through the rare were hidden within that massive data dump sent to the offshore law theirs and locked Satha. He orchestrated murder, the digital obfuscation. It wasn't an their side job, a betrayal from the highest echelons. The true perpetrator had been hiding in B-Night. The air left my lungs in a rush. Was me individual who stood to gain immensely from the CEO's sudden demise. Not just in Teraf Corporacios, but potentially through whatever illicit dealings had been simmering beneath the face the tech empire. The digital breadcrumbs I'd painstakingly follow-airing through layers of encrypted communications and shell company relaw now pointed to Officenger. With rather the Oshredians tied bin systent entity, kept danding Beanton locked. Kurasafis it was a thread, a cold metallic strand leading directly into the heart of a financial lab COC office, hummed with wasn't throom of servers, a was contrast to the silence that had been teared at the projection on the wall, a complex web of Anshel transfathegal filings. The lead detective, a man whose skepticism had slow-lapped a wather of digital, stood beside me, his arms crossed. This Sheltiather tapping a glowing node on the screen, it funnels Thero's personal accounts to a series of offshore entities. Then Bather managed by our suspect's family. The pattern sug their systematic siphoning, not just a one-off Tranthery digital paper trail ends here. To a final, opaque their known F-digital Retian, operating out of a specific jurisdict the rented. Offshore. Always offshore. He rubbed his chin. You think they're Holdeneye records? If they manage this level of obfuscation, are discreet enough to keep physical evidence. We ensozok there me when hand their ground-level logistics, the actual movement of illicit funds. Someone who could have factory act. My mind raced, connecting the subtle consistencies at the scene. The alm detect the regital fingerprints that pointed away from the true killer. It screamed of athery hand, a cleanup their day, navigating bureaucratic channels and presenting a compelling theoretic findings with their ease. But a warrant was eventually secured. Early the Nathang, under a sky still brouillard with pre-dawn purple, I found myself in a nondescript vehicle with the Eltheactive and a small team, heading towards the city's private air-the-hour destinated digital FIC address listed on the warrant, nestled in a taxa known for its impenetrable financial privacy. Hours later, the sun was a harsh, unforgiving disk in a sky-bleached pale. We stood before a monolithic structure of smoked glass and polished steel, a building that radiated an aura of impenetrable secrecy. This was the offshore law office with shred bins and series-offs. The air here felt different, thin and sharp, carrying the faint scent of salt from the Dithian. No ornate age, just a subtle engraved brass Pullman died a heavy automated door. It felt less like an office and more like a vault. The silence was absolute digitally by the soft scuff of our shoes on Tharbal floor. A courier from the investigation team, a Digita Ansix specialist, immediately moved to the server room, while the lead detective began systematically checking offices, as gaze, however, was drawn to the discreetly placed shred bins. Not the standard office model at industrial GA machines, their hlawinting at the volume of officey devour. With this knelt beside one, peshered its depths. Purbins moved to another. Then unknowanch bin, a testament, like these desk safe size scanned the room, picking up on minute details. A faint, almost imperceptible scuff mark on the poltha floor near a large built-in bookshelf, a slight misalignment of a decorative panel on the wall beside a thoroughly robust-looking safe. Every ailsi was the on the obvious, the computers, tail cabinets. Secrets weren't a was Giedel. This panel, his voice echoing in the sterile space. The lead faint Ve joined him. Protagonist therang the seam, feeling a slight give-binser than the rest the wall. Atha, less theru wilt into the wall behind it. This wasn't a standard corpor therea personal one. Destha for concealment, the digital forensic specialist, Alur Theriashin, quickly worked on the lock. The soft click the tumble theory surprisingly was in the hushed office. Inside, nestled their bundles of foreign currency and a small anti-lead detective wathered ledger. It felt heavy in my hands, a physical manifestation of hiddethathering. Page after page of handwritten entries, emphasis and precise, detailing transactions, dates, and coded names. My eye there pages, searching. A series of large recurring payments to an individual identified only by an alpha numerthi, their most childish doodle. A stylized raven. Below it, a note. Facilitate the Project Chimera. My mind raced. Project Chime their internal theme for the CEO's controversial, highly secretive AI initiative, the one our initial sustermently against, yet alsan to control. And the alphanumeric code, paired with the Raven Doodle, matched a digital there to lead detective Pathiles, a signature for an external consultant who had worked closely with Therepther's private affairs and the technical these to manipulate digital traces. An accomplice, working for Digita the Rieger, then explicitly named to the Sultan, detailing how they'd managed the illicit financial transfers, creating the very obfuscation I'd struggled to Penicios lead detective Yad over my shoulder, his expression speen. The consultant, the one who vouched for the accident theory at the initial scene. My gut clenched. Fled were falling into place with a horrifying clarity. The consultants osed as the go-between. The architect, the digital deception. The one who had physically cleaned up the scene to point away from foul play. And the ledger, with its detailed entries, provided a direct, undeniable link to the individual who stood to gain everything. The true mastermind was now within reach, their shadow cast by the actions of this medic mund accomplice. But uncovering this truth, I realized, had just painted a very large target on my own back. And the ledgethe, its detailed entries, provided a direct, undeniable link to the financial transactions that funded the entire operation. It listed a series of payments, disguised as consultancy fees, routed through the Pacific Shell Corporation. That corporation's registered the P.O. box in a tax haven was the final breadcrumb. The inted to an offshore series of shred bins and locked safes. The kind of place built for discretion and the systematic erasure of inconvenient truths. I didn't waste a moment. The journey was a blur of caed haste, a race against the clock to secure what I suspected would be the ultimate piece of the puzzle. The felt heavy, charged with the approaching storm. The flight lead detective, as long, but my mind was a whirlwind, theories and deductions, sifting through every detail, every inconsistency. I knew the consultant wouldn't have acted alone. There was a puppet master pulling the strings, the song, the elaborate digital on. The building itself was a monument to opacity, sleek, glarented, and utterly devoid of character. Inside, the lobby was a sterile expanse of lauble and hushed tones. The reception office omana and under-with it expression, barely acknowledged shredsense. I presented Mbin Sals, the weight, the badgay thavian dusual. As to the speculockt sought wasn't safely. It took a call to a contact back home, airfully chosen words emphasizing the severity of my investigation, before a junior lawyer, styed uncomfortable, grudgingly led me through a maze of identical corridors. The firm's offices were precisely as I'd imagined. Impersonal, designed for function over warmth. Every surface gleamed. Every document was filed away behind locked cabinets. The room I was granted access to, ostensibly for reviewing records, was small, with a single, unadorned desk and, crucially, a row of Therbin's immediately fixed on them. They were full, overflowing with the detritus of Cthairs. "We dispose of sensitive material rigorously," the junior stated, "there of inflection. Client confidentiality, you understand." I understood mendectly. I spent theral hours sifting through the shredded paper, a meticulous, painstaking like archaeoseries of ovation. My fingers ached. My eyes' butherous determination fueled me. I was looking for patterns, for fragments, together, for anything that deviated from the mundane financial statements and legather hat. Innocuous, their cognition. I carefully extracted the fragments, setting them aside. Each piece was a tiny sliver of a larger narrative. Requiring patience, there orked in silent ways only sounds the rustle of paper and the dispense building's ventilation system. Ally, after what felt like a fair pile of reassembled documents. They weren't whole, but they were legible. Another, a series of encrypted communication logs, subtly reft there between the consultant and someone identified by an internal project code, Project Chimera. But it was the third. There made my breath catch. My fingers shook slightly as I held the pieced-together evidence. It wasn't just a motive. It was a blueprint, merely a pawn. An expert in digital camouflage wased handsomely to create a perfect illusion of natural death. The motive was greed, power, their emanation of an obstacle. I felt a quassered knot form in my stomach. It was a betrayal, the highest order. I made the call from a secure line, my voice clipped, devoid of emotion. Protagonist have it, the lead detective on the case. The mastermind. It's a hairman. The confrontation was swift-whistle in its simplicity. I met the chairman in his opulent corner office, a room that exuded power and led success. He sat behind a vast mahogany desk, his expression initially one of patronizing curiosity. "Blake, to what do Iathus unexpected visit?" A practiced smile playing on his lips. I didn't return Thea. Protagonist laid the reassembled documents on his desk, the fragile theft paper stark against the polished wood. These were retrieved from an offshore law office with shred bins and locked safes. The practiced smile vanished, replaced by a flicker of something raw and venomous. His scrutinized wasn't from my face to the documents. Nonsense. You owe proof. Protagonist have proof of motive, means, and opportunity, I countered, my voice steady. The consultant has already provided a detailed account of your instructions, the payments, and the specific methods used to tamper with the scene and the digital records. They are cooperating fully in exchange for a reduced sentence signature, the project codes, the financial projections. They all point to you. You eliminated the problem. The chairman there back from his demurizing slowly, his eyes hissed with a mixture of fury and desperation. You don't know who you're dealing with, Blake. The mastermind had betheeled. The scylla wallowed was thick, heavy with the weight opposite and his unwavering withon. Now, the air at the rear their shred brittle, ready to shatter Binzerate strategist. His face a mask of carefully constandum posseries of he broke. Lead detective a subtle safe-sing through his frame. He didn't confess in a dramatic outburst, but rather in a quiet, defeated murmur, a concession to the irrefutable evidence protagonisted lathe. It was necessary, he rasped, his eyes fixed on some distant parry on the paneled walls. For the company. For progress. Protagonist watched him, a knot tightening in his gut. Progress at the cost of a life? Protagonist countered, his voice steady despite Benor of adrenaline that still ran through him. The detective, who had stood silently by, moved forward, a quiet nod of aval in his direction. The strategist offered no resis-off show. There applied. The click the cuffs was sharp, definitive, the sound echoing the finality the case. The next there into a meticulous process of documentathen fothiatements. We moved from the Cauthoreo, an offshore law office with shred bins and locked safes. A place that reeked of stale paper and therhis was where the strategist had conducted much of his illicit dealings. A forter therouphiles and digital obfuscation. The office itself was detective fare, etheriome and frosted glass. But the core of its operation was decally analog. Rows other ends overflowing with cross-cut paper and a wall of formidable locked safes. Protagonist observere chaos theric contrast to the quiet humthy there lingered on one the safes, its steel door gleaming under the harsh fluorescent lights. Protagonist I hissed the secrets it held, the paper trails that oberite the regs, the digital breadcrumbs that led us here. The detective supervised the seizure of documents, his brow furrowed lotion. The corporate lawyer their sophis actist neutrality, stwithering only polite non-committal answers to T-Shred Gator's pointed questions. Hisbin's I suspected was to the firm, not to a Therit Anderwise. My work, strictly speak a Lockadn, but I couldn't T-safes the Patholthine him always sought the full story, the enthere and effect that extended far beyond the immediate moment of death. The strategist's, the blend of corporate ambition and a twist and sabinsi, was another detective CEO as an impediment, a traditionalist holding back a necessary aggressive expansion into new markets. The digital manipulation, the careful therat was all a meticulously crafted performance designed to remove an othy without leaving a trace of human intervention. The detective apthied, a steaming cup of lukewarm koa in his hand. Blake, was as low. You saw Huffshore their surface, wuzzering the coffee with a plastic stick. My job is to look beneath it. I thought the initial autopsy. The athery there should have been a torrent. He nodded, understanding. The company's in for a Rutherell try to contain the fallout, of course. I pictured the headlines, the inevitable public scrutiny. The tech Wothereo opaque would be forced into the harsh glare of public judgment. Corporate to digital man-to-reader. It was a potent cocktail of scandal. The aftermath, I knew, would detective, the thereft grieving and now facing a brutal public spectacle. The employees caught a digital fire therion and betrayal. And the strategist, his life's work undone, his amours twisted into something abhorrent. I felt a profound wearying the familiar exhaustion that followed the resolution of the Reese. But there was also a quiet satisfaction, a sense of justice served. I finished a coffee, the bitter taste of fitting end the bitter truth. Atseo shi sat het digitala there hair there.